A new superseding indictment against former President Donald Trump in the federal election subversion case. Special counsel Jack Smith filing a slimmed-down version of the charges after the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity dismantled parts of the original case. CNN's Caitlin Polance is back with us now. Caitlin, you have new reporting on how Trump's defense team is reacting. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Phil, I did speak to a source that has some ability to have insight into what that defense team is thinking right now. They were expecting a rewriting of the charges against Donald Trump like this following that Supreme Court opinion around presidential immunity. So not a surprise there. However, the timing, that's a surprise. There was an expectation it might come later in the fall, especially after there is a deadline on Friday and a hearing set for next week in this case to figure out the path forward. The fact that it's coming before those things happen, that was a surprise. The other thing is that Donald Trump's defense team didn't get a heads up from the special counsel that they were going back to the grand jury in federal court in Washington, D.C. today to approve this new set of allegations and the rewritten charges. Even so, with this now here before them, it's something that the defense team is going to be able to look at, demand more about what was said to the grand jury in Washington, D.C.'s federal court as they were looking at the rewritten charges and asked to approve them. So more evidence potentially to go forward to the case. And then also there may be a lot to contest here still in court that the defense team can try.
Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, I want to go to you first. I want to get your reaction to this move by special counsel Jack Smith, essentially cutting out what the Supreme Court believes that President Trump did, former President Trump did in his official capacity, making it more about what he was doing in his campaign capacity, his capacity as a candidate. How effective do you think that that's going to be to move this case forward?
I think what they did here is they streamlined things and really just pared it down to the president, the former president, when he was acting as candidate Trump or in his private capacity, because they point out in this new indictment, in the superseding indictment, which, by the way, is very common for prosecutors to do, to supersede an indictment. This just cleans it up and takes out any of either the evidence or the facts and the allegations that the Supreme Court ruled in July were official acts and part of his official acts. So they took all of that out, including the Department of Justice and Jeffrey Clark, that he was co-conspirator number 4. That has been removed. There were 6 co-conspirators in the initial one. So that was pared down. Anything with the Department of Justice is out. And this is just all about candidate Trump now trying to subvert the results of the election.
So, Norm Eisen, this is, as we've been saying, it's slimmed down, it's revised, but at the same time, you still have the same 4 charges. By removing everything that Trump did in his official capacity to what he was just doing in his capacity as a candidate, does that neutralize, do you think, the concerns that were raised by the Supreme Court in their ruling when it comes to presidential immunity?
Alex, while I strongly disagreed with some aspects of Trump v. U.S., the Supreme Court decision, the edits that the prosecutors have made here speak to the concerns of the court that unofficial conduct may be prosecuted, like political candidate conduct. It's not just what they cut to meet the Supreme Court's test, which I think Judge Chutkan will now apply that test to this indictment, this superseding indictment. It will ride through. They made cuts. They went from 45 paragraphs to 36 paragraphs, from 130 pages to 106 pages. But if you look, they also made subtle additions. Before they said the defendant made knowingly false claims. Now they say the defendant used his campaign to repeat and disseminate knowingly false claims. They have cleaned this up for the court, and I think we're going to see a series of court proceedings now adjudicating this, which will be of the utmost interest to the public, because that's what the Supreme Court asked. Judge Chutkan, apply our test. So look for a series of briefings and hearings here in D.C. federal court.
Jim Trusty, you're a former attorney for the former president. It was a victory for the Trump camp when the Supreme Court made their ruling almost 2 months ago on July 1st, granting or essentially stating that the office of the presidency has these sweeping powers of immunity. But now this is yet something else that the Trump team has to contend with. What do you expect the reaction from his legal team to be?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, look, the devil is in the details of that immunity ruling. In the ruling, they set up essentially practical landmines for Jack Smith to deal with. It's not just a question of whether immunized information is inadmissible at trial. That's easy to deal with. You just keep the same indictment, you go to trial, but you're not allowed to ask questions about Jeffrey Clark, for instance. But it also said you can't contaminate the grand jury with immunized information. And that's what this is trying to address. This is Jack Smith being very aggressive, trying to get out in front before there's a hearing with Judge Chutkan, where she'll be called upon to decide which matters are admissible and which ones aren't. If he's lucky, if he's right, and if he's not being too creative by saying Mike Pence wears 2 or 3 hats, then his indictment will survive that hearing. Judge Chutkan will sign up and say, you're right, everything that's left is a personal act. But if there's even a single one where he is wrong, if the defense can convince Judge Chutkan, hey, this is a bridge too far, Mike Pence doesn't wear a special hat that says President of the Senate, and she agrees, guess what happens? He goes back and tries to get another indictment. So this is not really a great moment for Jack Smith. It is slimming it down because of the way the immunity ruling came out. But it's not a win at all at this point. We'll have to see how that hearing goes that Norm was talking about.
Caitlin, on that note about the former vice president's role, that's something you mentioned as well. So essentially, as far as I understand, Jack Smith is now talking about Mike Pence not as vice president, but as the president of the Senate. And that, therefore, is not part of Trump's official relationship with his vice president. That's more a campaign issue. Is that right?
A campaign issue, or actually, Alex, it's that Mike Pence, under the Constitution, the way that the prosecutors are framing this is a part of a different branch of government. On January 6th, he's part of the legislative branch overseeing Congress. And so that is how they're trying to make sure that the bubble isn't so wide over Pence that they can't use him at all. Now, this is one of those things that the judge is very likely going to have to look at the trial level, Judge Chutkan. And then it is very likely something that the appeals courts and even the Supreme Court will want to look at, because not only, remember, is it that they can't have that as part of the charges. One of the things the Supreme Court said as well was you can't use it as evidence in the case, things that were happening. And so when you see in this indictment conversations on the phone, in person even, between Mike Pence and Donald Trump, those are still here. But other things that Trump was saying to people in the Oval Office, that's cut out now, because that must be something the Justice Department doesn't want to have to fight over. There is very likely going to be a big fight over Pence specifically as the vice president, what that role is. And we are, as we are so many times in these Trumps related to Donald Trump cases, we are in truly uncharted territory where the courts are having to figure out things they've never had to figure out before.
Karen, how do you expect the Trump team to go after that argument that Pence was acting in a different capacity? And the other arguments that Jack Smith is now making now, trying to redefine things, I should say not from a campaign stance, but from an official stance, unofficial rather.
Yeah, so I mean, it all boils down to whether Donald Trump was acting in his official capacity, whether these were official acts, if you will. And Mike Pence is similarly situated because, as Caitlin pointed out, he's part of the executive branch when he's vice president. But this ceremonial role that he was playing, or that he has in the Constitution, where he has to certify the election as the vice president and the president of the Senate, that's what he was acting in that capacity at that time. And so they're going to emphasize that as part of this case, I think. And of course, the Trump team is going to make the counter argument and say, no, that's his vice president, right? He's part of that branch. So that's what they're going to say. And it'll be up to the judge to make those determinations.
and that it's official and therefore it's covered by presidential immunity. It is a fascinating move by Jack Smith, going to make for a very interesting few weeks ahead.